Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. I'm so excited to be joined by the fantastic Susan Kelechi Watson to talk all about This Is Us. And I just wanted to start by asking you so much about being in a show for this number of seasons and the richness that comes with that, because I imagine that this must be unlike any other job that you've done before in the way that you're allowed to really advocate for your character and have
Mhm,
so much more input and add a lot of
mhm.
minutia to her. And so I wanted to ask you about the ways in which you feel over the seasons you've really had that opportunity to advocate for who she has become as a character on screen for us.
Oh, wow. That's so good. Yeah. Um, it's a really good question. And I mean that sometimes people just say it, but that was really good. Um, I love being able to advocate for her, and I'm glad I'm in an environment where I can. I've heard like a lot of times people are on shows where they feel like they can't say anything about their character, but there's an open door policy on our show that Dan Fogelman has always created from the get-go, that you can walk in and talk about it. And, if there's anything that is like a hiccup for you or is not striking you as authentic, or you feel like, oh, they would do this or they would do that. Or you're like, why aren't they dealing with this? I feel like they're probably struggling with that. You can bring it up. And so I've been able to do that with my character. Like, for example, this season, I felt like this would very much be a time where her dance studio was probably struggling, or, you know what I mean? Like, would that still be open? Like, I don't know that, she would have that. And I mentioned that to one of the writers at the beginning of the season. And then, as we saw it unfold, like, you saw the struggle that she had with her dance studio and eventually had to close it. Because I felt like that's such a painful thing for so many people, that this is like their dream. And it's coming to an end, not because of anything that they've done, just because of, like, it's the first time that life has just sort of affected everybody in a way that it's not about what you did or what you didn't do. It's just what happened across the board to everybody. So there was no, fairness in it or anything like that. Um, there are times I advocate for who she is as a parent, the type of parent that she is, the type of parent that I think she wants to be, for her as a wife, like what's happening, in their relationship. Would she necessarily be on his side in this moment, or is she being too selfless? Is it like time for her to speak up for herself? Is it time for her to not so much, you know, um, have her own back in this moment? There's just things like that um, that I always kind of want to be aware for with Beth. And I always feel at ease to be able to bring those things up and to be able to discuss them and talk about it. And it's not like there's always something, um, but when there are moments like that that do come up, I always want to make sure I'm being as authentic as possible, that it's following her storyline in a way that makes sense, that it's things that I feel like we've already established or that we're establishing, that I just want to make sure there's like a follow through with that. And it feels like a complete, sentence. Like we really, got all the way to the end of that, to the period, and, follow through on that. But it's so many times it's already there. It's already in the script. It's just when those opportunities arise where I feel like there's space for it, there's space to sort of expand and rethink about something, or like I said, just as stories are still being developed, if I can chime in and say, oh, I was thinking about this, then those opportunities are definitely there for me to do that.
And looking at your performance when it comes to storylines like the dance studio closing and the setbacks that she faces, one of the things that I think is really stunning that you always manage to approach is finding the different ways in which it's going to affect her emotionally. Her response to this is very different to any of the setbacks that we've seen her face
Mm-hmm.
before. And
Mm-hmm.
even just that moment where she was having a possible job interview and then it got canceled,
Mm-hmm.
and her processing was laughter,
Mm-hmm.
and finding that emotional traction for her.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really interested in how you look at what it is that she's processing. And even this far into the show, having had as many roadblocks as we've had, you're still always looking to find new ways for her to process this journey.
Yeah. Yeah. You always want to keep it interesting, even for yourself, But I find, like, when I look at life, because that's like, as an actor, what you do, you kind of like study people all the time. You don't even realize you're doing it. That people do things not in like the everyday way all the time, or like the way that we would imagine that if you're sad, you cry, or if you're upset, you yell, or, it's not always like that direct correlation with the emotion and how we, release that emotion. And I always think that those are like the most interesting moments, they're just more interesting. And sometimes there's opportunity to make those things up. Like, oh, maybe, somebody would have cried, but wouldn't it be interesting if somebody, laughed, or if somebody, started eating Lucky Charms instead. And like I said, like a lot of those things are just, they're already there, but there's a way to kind of, push them and explore them more, so that we're just always learning something different about the character, but they still feel like the same person. Like, so I never want somebody to be like, how Beth is just brand new in season 3. I don't recognize this, you don't want to do that, but even if Beth is like feeling herself and has a new life with the dance and it's this, you still want to feel like you recognize her. You recognize her having a good day, a good moment. You recognize that she's feeling herself, that life is good. And then when she's upset and when she's sad, you want to still see her in that as well. So, and like you said, it's a show that's going on now. We're going into 6 seasons. So you want to keep playing with stuff and have something to do, for 6 seasons that doesn't feel like, you stopped at season 1 and sort of figured it all out. Because I still don't think I've completely figured it out. Every time I get on set after a hiatus, I'm like, ooh, let me get back, find her again. Let me see, what this is again in a fresh way, so that it doesn't feel, like the same old thing.
And the show also really allows itself to go into a lot of the smaller, quieter character moments as well. And there's so many scenes throughout the show that aren't even necessarily about plot, but just about living and breathing with these characters. Mm-hmm. And in those moments, you really carry that through into your performance, because it's not always about moving around within a scene. It's not always about the dialogue in the moment. Sometimes it's just a small inflection of the mm-hmm. eye that can tell a story about where she is in that moment and the setting. Mm-hmm. Was that something where when you first came into the show, you found you were thinking a little bit more consciously about the smaller moments because of the way that it just allows the camera to sit there with you sometimes? Mm-hmm. And do you feel like that's really evolved for you throughout the time?
No, I didn't think about it. I thought about it the least at the beginning. And then as I was watching the show, then I thought, oh, those are the Bethisms maybe. So now we can incorporate it into it, So I was much more unaware. That's the great part of when you start something new and you're kind of in the bubble of everything, you're just throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks, and you're just kind of figuring it out. And there were little things that Beth did. Like I remember there was something like, I remember it's like, I think season 1, because William is talking, and it's her and Randall and William in the kitchen of their old house, and he says something about sex, or I don't know, he's talking about something, and Beth is eating a yogurt, and she does like this little shoulder shimmy, like, yes, you know what I mean? Like enjoying the yogurt and listening to him talk about sex, while Randall's kind of like, and I was like, oh, when she gets excited, maybe like she's she finds a shoulder shimmy, like that's somewhere in her. Or sometimes the way that she looks at Randall, there's a little pop of the eye, and maybe that's her thing. But I learned it from watching what was happening, and then as I was trying to find who she was and create who she was, then those things can be more incorporated into it. Yeah.
And the show obviously has such a unique track in the way that we're jumping around between space and time as well. And one of the aspects that I was curious about performance-wise there are moments where suddenly there's a scene that happened several episodes ago, or maybe a whole season ago, that you're jumping back to, and you're taking a different emotional journey with it. Mm-hmm. And that must be a really fascinating performance practice, to really mm-hmm. think juxtaposition, different emotional layering that you're bringing into a same moment that you've already visited. And so I was interested in what that looks like for you, and how you layer that and set that up for yourself when that happens.
It's kind of a helpful thing. It gives you like a bit of an alley-oop, right? To be able to see the memory, to kind of be able to go back and revisit it, and then piggyback onto it. Sometimes it reframes it, because the show tells story a lot of times out of order time-wise. So you think you're watching it for this reason, and then fast forward, you were really watching it for this bigger reason. And so you get to add on this other part of the story that is new. to something that you think you already figured out, you thought you knew, and now this is a whole other side of the story. It's one of the things I love most about This Is Us, is that it's this constant like peeling away of layers. It's just always constant. And it reminds me, so much of like, sometimes I look back now, I've been, talking with family and friends and thinking about memories that I have that I've just completely forgotten, or I've reframed it from just my perspective. So I forgot everything else that happened around it. And people are chiming in with their parts of the memory. And I'm like, oh, I love this because I completely forgot that. I forgot certain people were there. I forgot, and I've just framed it from this particular perspective. And what I love about the show is that sometimes you'll watch it just from that person's perspective, and then you'll go back and it'll open up telling it from so-and-so's perspective, and you'll see, what happened from another point of view. And so you get the whole truth kind of filled in as you go. And it's one of the main things that keeps the show alive and so interesting, is that you kind of have never fully explored the moment because there's so many different points of view to see it from.
And with that peeling away of layers as well, I wanted to ask you about how that comes into track when it comes to a lot of your character development and backstory. Because when we look at Beth as a character at the beginning of the show, we very much saw her through the eyes of the Pearson family. And then every single season, we just get so many more details about her backstory, her family, her relationship with her mom. And all of those aspects have continued to add a lot more to her. But obviously, those were details that you didn't have at the beginning.
Right.
You didn't know that those were going to be part of the scripts. And did that cause you to change any of the information that you constructed for yourself, or to pivot small details along the way? Or did you find that it really fit into a lot of what you'd already constructed for her?
I think it fit in. We hadn't talked about her background a lot. So it was filling in blanks that I didn't have. But those blanks were there to sort of be filled in. And there was a space for it. There was room for it. There was room to know. And the dance backstory is similar to my dance backstory. So there was parts of it that I had already connected with me personally as a person. So to bring that into Beth, to make one of her parents like Jamaican, both my parents are Jamaican, that was something that was like, okay, I understand. These are things that I can bring into this that don't take me far away from the journey of what's, already being created. In the beginning, we didn't know a lot about her. And so there was a lot of freedom to create it. I could say, oh, I think she was, probably did this, or she was that. And I could sort of infuse it with those things and let my imagination kind of go wild with it, because nobody was going to stop that part of the process. It was all about like, you know what I mean? It's the stuff behind the lines anyway. So nobody's going to say, oh, no, you can't think that. So there was the fun of sort of coming up with and creating who she is in my own imagination. But then when it started to really come down on paper, it was so interesting and so fun. And then there were certain moments where I felt like, oh, wow, how do I do this? Like, this is another part of her I had to explore. And it was another side of her. It was a more vulnerable side of her. We get to see a lot of the side of her that is kind of, helping the Pearsons family kind of figure themselves out, So then there was this side of her that still needed to be figured out. So now she's the vulnerable one. She's the one who's not sure how to have this relationship with her mother and doesn't know how to really pursue her dreams and wants to figure out who she is outside of being like a wife and a mom, and wants to have that opportunity for herself. And that's the story I've heard from so many different women, is they're not just a wife or a mom or these labels and categories. Like, they're a whole person with all these dreams and hopes that are still there, regardless of, if they've had kids, regardless if they've gotten married, they still have desires of their own that are outside of that. And that's something that's always, always, always been important for me to show with Beth, is that she's her own woman first. And then she's these other things. They're all part of the whole, but her being hers is really a really important part of it. And I think that honors women, it honors the journey of women as people, and reminds people that they're more than just whatever label, people want to put on it because of whatever relationships that they have.
With the relationship with her mom, that brings such a specific vulnerability out in her, and it even feels like they're falling into a lot of habits and they become versions of themselves that they probably were, 10, 15, 20 years ago, because habitually you always get a little bit stuck in that space sometimes with certain relationships, and different relationships bring out totally different sides of you. And so once you got more opportunity to explore that, and then, really delving into it a lot more in recent episodes, how did you want to explore a totally different style of vulnerability within her as a character?
Yeah, it's this thing of like, you have to allow yourself to regress a little bit. And it's that reminder of, we all do it. We all do it. We go back to our parents and just a little part of you is still like 9, 10. And you're like, oh my God, and it's so hard to shake, you know what I mean? You go back, you're around your siblings and it's like, dang, I'm the third one in the middle. You know what I mean? Like, you can't shake it. And it's remembering that too, like bringing that to it as the actor of like, remember that there's that regression. Remember there's the part of you that sort of remains loyal to that, playing that role, no matter how much in life we try to shake it off. And then there's the part of you that's battling for the new territory of being an adult and being in your own space and being who you are now, and trying to show that off and feeling yourself a little bit and trying to show your mom like, yeah, I'm this now. And they remind you that you're their kid and, in the same relationship. And so there are all those things. And that's what makes it interesting and kind of complex. And in one of the episodes where Beth goes off on Mama C at the dinner table and goes back to, in some way, apologize for doing that, I remember Ken Olin was directing that episode. And I remember him telling me like, yes, you make the apology for speaking to her that way, but don't apologize for being who you are and being the woman that you are right now. That's not the apology that's happening. Like, you're standing fully in that. And that was such a great and interesting note, because it was the transition for Beth of, I'm not going to remain loyal to this thing anymore. Like, I don't feel good about myself when you come around, and I don't want to feel that way. I want to be able to enjoy you as a person and still enjoy my life. And I want to be able to have you around. But if I have to compromise one for the other, that's going to be a problem. And that's a really complex place that a lot of us have come to with our parents. How do we figure out now to let them know, like, no, I'm grown. I'm not going to be that little girl anymore, that little boy anymore. So it's recalling that, and working with Felicia is so amazing, because it's an easy thing to imagine her as her and Beth as mother and daughter. That's not a hard leap for me, as she's been a mentor in my life, for many years. So the opportunity to play this out with her, someone who I've learned the art of, the skill of acting from, that's been a whole nother like gift, in terms of doing this.
With the fact that she has been such a mentor to you in your career, even preceding her being cast in the show and the two of you working together, that was a pre-existing relationship that the two of you already had. Yeah. What is the impact that you feel that she's really had on your career and your work as an actor from that mentorship over these years?
One of the things that Felicia taught me a long time ago was the inner reality creates the outer form. And so it was all about creating that inner life for the character. And she was saying that everything comes out of love, and it can be broken, or it can be misshaped, or it could be whatever, but people usually come out of a place of love. It starts there first, and then it breaks into all these different things that can become, good and evil, whatever it is. But mostly that it starts from the inside and it manifests its way out. And that's something that has always stayed with me, because that has been my way of working, that you make it as real as you can for yourself, and that will begin to manifest outward. And that's, to me, what creates the nuances in characters. It makes them the idiosyncrasies and the things that we don't even recognize that we're doing, but it's because they're really living a life on the inside of them. So that's something that I always try to do. And it's something that I find keeps it fresh, because if you're living it, you're always kind of finding the new thing or the next thing. And it, as an actor, you want to keep it fresh. You don't ever want it to kind of die out, or you feel like I'm bored, or I'm over it, or I've learned everything I need to know about this person. That's, to me, I don't ever want it to kind of end. I always want to keep, learning until it comes to an end. And then I want to feel like I didn't leave any stone unturned. You know what I mean? Like, I want to make sure, like, I really tried to find every little thing that we could find about Beth, or about any character that I play.
With keeping it fresh, I find it so interesting the way that you've always described the work on the show amongst all of the cast, being that you come into a scene with a certain idea, and a few inklings of where it might go, but it's never a specific roadmap, because you never want to map it out, because everyone on the cast is so open to responding to situations in the moment. And that's where you really find a lot of the meat and a lot of the essence in a scene.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to ask about the journey of constructing scenes, whether it's with Sterling, whether it's with Felicia, or any of the other cast, with that stylistic approach in mind, and how that came to be the crux of how you work on the show.
I love that, because a scene is always more than you. And I feel like if you're willing to let that other person shine, then you can really have an amazing scene. And I feel like sort of the only way you can do that is to allow it to be a conversation. When you start to act the scene, allow this to be a back and forth, allow it to be a real conversation. You don't know where it's going to go. If I sit with anybody, like sitting here with you, I have no clue the next thing that's going to happen. I'm not going to try to orchestrate that. I'm just going to see what it is. And if I know enough about where I'm coming from, my point of view, my perspective, I'm not worried about where it goes. I'm just going to follow it. And the great thing about being a part of this cast is that I know they're going to bring something wonderful to the table. So I know I have somewhere to go. I know there's going to be somewhere, to go. And it could be way better than what I imagined. So I don't want to, force myself in, or, force some shape onto a scene, or force it to go in this one direction, because I think, oh, it'll be so hot if it went just like this. So I'm going to act it just like this. So they go just like this, I don't like to work like that. I like to just go in with, it's almost like you go in with like the clay and the water and all the things. I think that's Alexa. I don't know. But you go in with all the materials, and then you find the shape of it when you're in there. I don't go in with anything like fully formed. And then you never know when you're going to get a note where somebody's like, no, I think it's easier than that. Or, oh, I think she's just kind of throwing it away. And then, God forbid, you're stuck in doing it one way, and you can't even take a note, or you get offended by a note or anything like that. And I wouldn't want that to happen either, because I respect the directors on our show so much. And I have such great relationships with so many of the directors that come through the show, because I just really respect and value their opinion and what they're bringing to the table and the arc of the story. So all those things make me just want to play, to get in there and just play with it and see what we find. And sometimes we find things that it's written, but then the way that we end up living it or acting it out, even the writers are like, oh, wow, I didn't even see it like that. I didn't even see that was there. And that happens when you have great writing. You can kind of go off and do really fun stuff with it, and just keep adding to it. Everybody should just like bring something to add. It's like the best potluck. You know what I'm saying? Somebody supplies the menu, and then everybody brings their good dish. You know what I'm saying? And then we all sit and eat it.
On a different tangent, there's something that you've spoken about in the past that I wanted to ask you about in regards to, that point in your career where you weren't yet getting the opportunities that you really wanted to, and that you took this idea of where you wanted things to be in the future, whether it was personally, professionally, other aspects of your life, and really tried to bring that into the present and kind of like imagining, if that was the case now, how would I want to be manifesting this?
Yeah.
And I just really wanted to ask about what that meant for you professionally, and how you really approached that idea of thinking about the future of your career and bringing it into the present, because I thought it was so fascinating.
Yeah, I would, so on a smaller scale, if I didn't have any money, which was often. I'm so broke. Oh God. I would try, like, living in New York City, I would try to carry change on me or something, or if I had something extra, like I would make an extra lunch or something and carry it with me to give away, because I wanted to have the practice of being able to give money away or give things away, because the goal was to get to a place where I can be in a position to do that, and I wanted to create that habit. And I figure if I could do it when I don't have anything, then I'll definitely do it when I have something. If, I wanted to produce. So it was like, all right, how do I play around with a web series and practice putting something like that together and creating something like that, because that's eventually what I want to do. So it was like not sort of, I guess, making my circumstances determine how I was going to respond. It was like just seeing them as the circumstances, but still being the person that I wanted to be, even within those circumstances. So, if I can give away 50 cents, one day I can give away, 50,000, you know what I'm saying? Because to be honest, at that time, even giving away small amounts was a lot to me. I didn't really have much, So, it was that type of thing. It was, I'll never forget. I'm learning that, like, success and failure is like two sides of the same coin, So I was like, all right, well, if I'm just the same coin and maybe I'm just flipped over on tails right now, I still need to be the same value, So I still need to just be who I am. And it can be challenging, but there was also a freedom in it, because it was like, oh, I don't have to succumb, I guess, to the circumstances. I can still be whoever I want to be in it. I don't have to make me sad. I can still be happy and live a happy life even in the midst of it. So that's the practice that I had. And there's times when you just kind of want to give up, and then you turn back around and say, nope, I'm right back in it. Or there's times when you feel like it's coming, or I feel like it's about to happen. So there's so many different emotions that can happen. I feel that for somebody who may be in a circumstance that they don't want to be in, but they know where they're going, like, just keep practicing where you're going, because eventually this circumstance will change. If anything, time is sort of the great equalizer. Time will always keep moving forward. And as long as that happens, there's always going to be change.
And you mentioned there that producing was something that you'd wanted to do for such a long time. And you recently were an executive producer on Between the World and Me. And so I just wanted to ask you about how your involvement came in stepping into a producer role on that special, and what it really meant to you to be such a creative part of a project like that.
Yeah, the first project I executive produced on was Premature by Rashad Ernesto Green, and that was the first time that I did it. So I started to get my feet wet with that, and that went to Sundance in 2019, and is now like on Hulu and went to theaters and things. So that was an amazing experience. Between the World and Me was a project that I had been a part of when it was a stage production at the Apollo and at the Kennedy Center. And after George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, and that, it was the pandemic, it was something that I felt like we needed to do again, but how could we reimagine this in a streaming form? Like, how can we reimagine this as something that can go far and wide, like everybody can get to see it, but it plays like a film, So I went and got with Cam and Camila Forbes and Ta-Nehisi Coates on that, and we began to reimagine what that could look like, and that's how it started. It was just a way to address what was going on in the world. I felt like it had already been addressed, and it was sad that we had to do it again. But if we do have to do it again, these are the words that feel like they get to the core of it, for me and for so many other people. So I thought that, what better way to do it with the material that was already there, but now just reimagining it in another form and letting it speak to us in another way.
Well, it is such a special and vital project to have been involved in. And thank you for sharing all of that on this and This Is Us as well. Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you, Maura.